Hi, everybody. This is Joel Butterly, the co-founder and CEO of InGenius Prep. Today, I wanted to talk about a short but very important element of the application. It's something that we call the application persona. Now, technically, this isn't actually part of the formal application. It's a term that we coined to refer to when an applicant has a theme about them, right? That's your persona, sort of like Nike has just do it. So too, you need to have sort of a theme to you. Hopefully it's not just do it. But an example of this might be something like a future Russian lit expert or a public health leader or a potential entrepreneur. There's a lot of different kind of themes that you could have that serve kind of a couple of purposes. So the first important purpose of an application persona is it makes you a lot more memorable. So an individual admissions officer, they might read 1,000 to 1,500 applications per cycle, each application being around 13 pages long. That's a lot of pages that they have to get through. Now, if your application has 10, let's say 10 different identities. It's like, I'm a scholar, I'm an athlete, I'm a debater, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a scientist, right? And this is extremely common, particularly for very high performing students, for them to try to cram a lot in to make it seem like they are just great at everything. The problem with that is that a lot of other students have done it. So it's not particularly, it doesn't really stand out. But beyond that, it's very hard to remember if you've then read 1,000 other applications. How would you think back to that application? Oh, I want to find the kid who did a little bit of everything. It's a lot easier if there's like a catchphrase that the person's coming away with. So if I read your application and I come away with, this person's going to be a leader as an environmental scientist, that's something that's easy for me to recall, environmental scientists. So what we find in polling our former admissions officers is that the idea of a theme triggers greater recall for the admissions officers, and therefore they're more likely to separate you from the pack. They're more likely to remember you and go back to your application. So it's extremely important, firstly, for memorability. The second reason it's important is that it makes you much more persuasive. At its most fundamental, the application is an argument. It is an argument that you should be admitted over other highly qualified applicants. That's what you're trying to prove. Now, you don't phrase it that way on the application, but fundamentally, that is the purpose of the application. For any of you that have done debate, you know that one really strong argument is better than 10 really weak arguments. So having an application persona is the equivalent of having one very strong argument. This is what differentiates me. This is what makes me unique or impressive. Whereas trying to do a little bit of everything is akin to having 10, weak arguments. When I think about how the application persona is reflected in the actual application itself, there's not a place where it says, what is your application persona? It's reflected to me, first and foremost, in the activities list. So when I go to the activities list, if the first 3 or 4 activities are consistent with one another, right, that develops a theme for me. I start thinking, oh, you're a specialist in something, you're an expert in something. If all 10 activities are different categories and completely unrelated, you come off a little bit like a dilettante. So it's important to have a persona, and it is important that that persona be comport with or at least be not in violation of the kind of most important extracurricular activities you have. When we start working with a student in grade 9 or grade 10, most of the time we start or nearly at the very beginning with a persona. And that usually it takes the form of, well, what are you passionate about? What do you like doing? And what are we going to build an extracurricular profile around? And so that persona is something that we work on as early as 9th grade. And you should too. You should think to yourself, what am I passionate about? And how can I specialize and be an expert in that thing? For students who are later in high school, don't have the luxury of building an extracurricular profile around their interest, don't worry. The solution is to write out all of your activities and write out the reasons you participate in them and what you did. So what kinds of things you did. And then your job is to find a common thread. So it might be the case that your charitable work and shadowing at a hospital are both related to your desire to eventually become a doctor or to become a healthcare professional. It might be the case that your interest in chess and political science, is actually motivated by an intricate knowledge of game theory or something along those lines. That's probably not a realistic example. But finding that persona is crucial because it makes sense of your application. It's worth noting that admissions, although it is extremely opaque and although it is fairly complicated, really can be simplified dramatically to two variables. And the first is, are you academically qualified? And most people understand that to be an important feature. The second is, are you an expert at something? Are you, the best at something? Are you a specialist of some form? The whole idea of a well-rounded student was kind of always a myth. I don't know if it was ever true, but it certainly hasn't been true for a while. What schools want is a well-rounded class. And a well-rounded class consists of a lot of students with very particular interests in different areas. That's a well-rounded class. So the students themselves are what we would refer to as egg-shaped. They've done some things that are, well-rounded, but a lot of their energy, perhaps most, is directed towards one key area or focus. That's sort of the top of the egg, right? It's sort of an angular point. So in any event, that's why the application persona is so important for the application. It is important to choose an application persona as early as possible to build an extracurricular profile around it. And it's essential that the application persona highlight what makes you special, right? So usually it's like what makes you special is, often it's what makes you special is sort of what you have accomplished related to your particular areas of interest. So the persona should center around that. Now, I mentioned that the persona is often kind of located in the activities list for me. Other places would be the essays or the letters of recommendation. So if you're really trying to push forward a good persona, it's not a bad idea to ask one of your recommenders to mention specifically, oh, Jason is going to be an incredible public health leader, something along those lines. That's a good idea to reinforce it, which means that other people have taken note of how impressive you are in a given area or a given field. It doesn't mean that every essay has to be directly on the nose about the application persona. Sometimes it's in the personal statement, but not in the secondary applications. And sometimes it's in those supplemental essays and not in the personal statement. But you should do an entire application with the goal that if a stranger were to read it and you were to ask them, summarize me in 2 sentences or less, that they would come up with your persona. That's sort of the mission. So in any event, I hope that was helpful. I understand that the application process can be incredibly daunting, and talking about a whole strategy that starts in grade 9 makes it even more so. The reality here is that much of what I'm saying is figure out what you're really passionate about, build extracurricular activities around it, and then have your application reflect that passion. Okay, that's it for today. I hope that this was helpful, and see you guys next time.